Amidst the frozen forest after a brutal snowstorm, a solitary biologist discovered something no one could believe. A tiny life form seemingly frozen to death, yet carrying within it a secret greater than life itself. No one knew why it was there. No one understood why. It was still alive. And from the moment Nathan decided to bring it home, the laws of nature began to crack. What he saved was not simply a puppy. After 3 days buried under the thick snow of a historic blizzard, the northern forest of Montana turned eerily silent. Every tree was draped in white fallen branches, stacked like evidence of a battle that nature had won. Nathan Keller, 39 years old, a seasoned field biologist, pushed through knee-deep snow with sharp eyes and a heavy mind. His job that day was to assess post-storm damage, counting surviving wildlife and planning ecological support for the harsh winter ahead. Nathan stopped in the once-used shelter by a herd of elk beneath a fallen pine canopy. Something was off. A small patch of black fur stood out against the pure white. He moved closer. A puppy so small it almost fit into the palm of his hand lay motionless, its entire body frozen solid like a living ice sculpture. Nathan's heart slowed a beat. He crouched down, his experienced hands gently lifting the tiny creature. No breath, no heartbeat. Eyes shut tight, a thin layer of frost covering its lashes and muzzle. "Why are you here?" "Alone." "In a cold place," Nathan murmured. Dozens of theories raced through his mind, abandoned, escaped from somewhere. Another victim of the storm, but whatever the answer was, he knew the one thing he couldn't do: leave it behind. According to protocol, he should record the body and leave it for natural decomposition. But something in the afternoon light, slicing through the snowy forest, or in that still face, made it impossible for Nathan to walk away. He carefully wrapped the animal in his coat, holding it close to his chest in an unconscious reflex. "I'm not going to let you melt away in this cold," he whispered. And with heavy but determined steps, he turned back toward the cabin. Nathan's cabin sat deep in the forest, nearly 20 miles from the nearest town, a place so quiet that even the sound of wind sneaking through the wooden boards could startle someone. But today, that cabin became an emergency recovery station for a tiny life form, a puppy that had nearly frozen to death. Nathan placed the creature on the wooden table beside the fireplace, laid down thick towels, and began carefully melting the ice that clung to its body. Water dripped from the dense fur, frozen stiff like steel. He didn't expect much. Science said that no creature could survive being frozen for hours under such extreme conditions, and yet something inside urged him to check again, just for peace of mind. He grabbed his stethoscope, gently pressed it against the pup's tiny chest, where the ice hadn't fully melted. For several seconds, there was only silence. But then, the faintest sound, as soft as a tap on glass. Nathan held his breath. He leaned in again, his hand trembling not from the cold. This time he was sure a heartbeat. Faint, weak, but real, no way. He whispered, eyes wide in astonishment. Through all his years in wilderness rescue, he had seen animals survive miraculous accidents, but never a case like this. Is a puppy so young and defenseless still alive after being completely frozen? That was something even veterinary textbooks had never documented. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan acted. He turned on the auxiliary heater, boiled water, and prepared warm towels. He applied special emergency techniques: heart massage, zone-by-zone temperature control, and fluid injection with a manual syringe. The equipment was outdated, but with experience and instinct, he knew exactly what to do. He stayed by the wooden table all night. The room gradually warmed, yet the atmosphere remained tense like an emergency ward. The puppy still lay motionless, eyes shut tight, but its tiny chest began to rise and fall slowly, gently. When the first light of dawn spilled into the cabin, the puppy breathed. Not deep, not strong, but it was a sign it was alive. Nathan collapsed into a chair, hands buried in his hair, tears falling before he could wipe them away. It wasn't weakness, it was the overwhelming surge of emotion after a night spent fighting death itself. Life wrestled back from the grip of a brutal winter. That first morning, after the miracle, sunlight filtered through the snow-covered pine branches and cast soft rays on the cabin's fogged window. Nathan sat silently on a wooden chair, holding a cup of cold coffee. Eyes fixed on the thick blanket atop the bed near the fireplace where the tiny creature lay, the puppy had passed. The worst. Its breathing was weak but steady. The small body, dark fur, still damp, was slowly warming up. Signs of life. What had seemed impossible hours ago now shimmered like a miracle in the dead of winter. Nathan named him Frost. Not only was he found in snow, but because frost itself had become the first trial of his life, one he had survived. Frost, the name rang out in the warm room, a declaration. You didn't just survive. You were reborn, but what amazed Nathan most wasn't that Frost had survived. It was his eyes, not panicked, not trembling. No whining like most newborn puppies do when cold or hungry. Instead, those eyes were wide open, deep black and steady, staring straight at him. That look wasn't mere survival instinct. It carried something more, something deeper, almost awareness. Little one, do you know I saved you? Nathan whispered as if speaking only to himself. But Frost didn't blink. He just stared, calm, alert, full of feeling. A gaze is completely irrational for a pup just a few days old. Frost didn't cry out from hunger or whimper because of unfamiliar surroundings. He just lay there silent, his eyes fixed on Nathan. That gaze stirred within Nathan an emotion he hadn't touched in a long time. Faith, not in science, not in himself, but in something greater, that certain beings come into this world for a special reason, defying every natural law. That entire day, Frost lay still by the fireplace, still too weak to move. Nathan warmed milk using a formula meant for orphaned animals, feeding it, drop by drop, through a small syringe. Frost cooperated completely. No resistance, no fear, as if he trusted Nathan entirely. Nathan had rescued wounded animals before, pulled wild wolves from traps, and treated hawks with broken wings. But he had never felt this way, that he wasn't simply saving Frost, but witnessing something far greater. A soul, a secret, perhaps just beginning to awaken amid the coldest winter. 3 days after the moment of life and death, Frost was no longer the tiny, motionless creature wrapped in a thick blanket. Beneath the soft light from the window, the puppy now could stand unsteady, trembling, but determined. Nathan, well versed in the developmental pace of wild animals, stood frozen. It was adorable. Not because this shouldn't be happening. A newborn pup was found nearly frozen solid in the snow, recovering with no after effects. No training is required. No guidance is needed. Every step Frost took felt as though he had walked before simply remembering, not learning. On the 5th day, Nathan tried calling out Frost's name from the kitchen. The little one wobbled, turned his head in the right direction, and walked over at an astonishing speed. No hesitation. No startled reaction to a new sound. At that moment, a thought flashed through Nathan's mind. Frost wasn't an ordinary puppy. Each day, Frost left Nathan even more bewildered. When Nathan placed an object, a glove somewhere in the cabin, Frost needed only one look to remember. Later, when asked about glove, he would head straight to it and pick the correct item without fail. Nathan began testing it. A series of basic commands, sit, lie down, turn head, must be said only once. Frost responded without confusion, as if every action had already been pre-programmed into that tender brain, unable to accept it as mere coincidence. Nathan brought out a veterinary manual to test Frost's neural reflexes' response to sound, light, and spatial memory. The results, all reactions, were faster than average, even comparable to that of dogs trained for military service. One night while Nathan was journaling Frost's recovery progress, he sensed a pair of eyes watching him. He looked up and saw Frost sitting near the fireplace door, silently staring and not blinking and not shifting. That gaze wasn't from a helpless animal. It was the gaze of a being observing and understanding the world. A vague but unmistakable feeling rose in Nathan's chest. Frost wasn't just a miraculously surviving puppy. He was a biological mystery. At first, Nathan thought he was just imagining things, a fleeting dreamlike sensation. A strange emotion appeared each time Frost touched him. It wasn't the feeling of holding a pet. It was deeper, different, as if something was being transferred through him, an image, a stream of thought, a sensation that no language could name. One morning as Nathan was about to head out into the woods to check the northern ridge, Frost suddenly blocked the door, silently looking at him, ears drooping. A soft whimper escaping Nathan hesitated, confused. The little one had never done that before, but still, he went out only to make it less than half a mile, when the wind suddenly shifted. Dark clouds gathered unnaturally fast, and a violent snowstorm swept in. Making it back to the cabin safely by sheer luck, Nathan looked at Frost and suddenly realized that the little one had known. It couldn't be a coincidence. From that day on, Nathan began paying closer attention, and little by little things revealed themselves. When distant sounds came from the forest, Frost had already warned him. When wild animals moved near the cabin, Frost had turned his gaze in their direction, even when everything outside was deathly quiet. Another time before the temperature gauge showed signs of an approaching cold front, Frost had already started trembling, barking softly, and burrowing into the heated blanket, as if he knew exactly what was coming. But what truly gave Nathan chills were the invisible connections. Every time Frost rested his head in Nathan's palm, fleeting images appeared in his mind: a snow-covered cliff, a dense gray sky, a streak of light cutting through darkness. Not clear, but enough for him to sense Frost was transmitting something, a kind of emotional signal, instinct, or maybe even memory. One evening in the pale glow of the fireplace, Nathan looked down at Frost, dozing by his feet. He whispered, not expecting a reply, "Frost, what are you, a puppy, or something more?" The question drifted into the still air, but Nathan already had the answer deep inside. No scientific proof, no theory needed, only an overwhelming, undeniable feeling. Frost didn't arrive by chance. He was a gift of nature, or perhaps a messenger of something beyond human understanding. And Nathan knew their meeting wasn't an accident. It was a choice. That night began like any other winter night. Outside, the wind howled through broken branches, and snow quietly layered over the tin roof and windowsills. Inside the small cabin, Nathan sat reading an old journal by the fire while Frost curled up under the desk, sleeping still as a tiny snowdrift. Everything felt so peaceful that Nathan had nearly forgotten he lived deep in the wilderness, where nature never gave warnings before unleashing its fury. But then Frost jolted upright, not a sound, not a bark, just the way his ears perked up. His body shivered, and he stepped toward Nathan. His dark eyes reflected the firelight, their gaze unusually deep. "What is it, buddy?" Nathan asked softly, bending down, but Frost didn't wait. He leaped forward, gently tugged the hem of Nathan's coat with his teeth, then turned toward the door as if signaling Nathan. Hesitated for a second. It was close to midnight. The wind was bitter, but something in Frost's eyes made it impossible to ignore. He threw on a thick coat, grabbed his flashlight, and followed Frost outside. The air was bone-chilling. The wind lashed his face in bursts, mixing the scent of snow and damp wood. Frost sprinted toward a small outcrop about 100 meters from the cabin, where the gorge below was visible. Nathan followed closely, the beam of his flashlight cutting through snow and darkness. And then a sound rang out, a thud, not thunder, not wind. It was the low, heavy sound of snow and rock, sliding as if the entire mountainside had shifted. Right before Nathan's eyes, a massive sheet of snow and debris from the far cliff began to collapse. A small avalanche, but enough to block the only trail leading out of the cabin. Had he still been inside, the path would have been buried, leaving Nathan trapped with no supplies and on a way to call for help for days, maybe longer in the worst-case scenario. Nathan stood frozen, panting, in the thick snow, heart pounding as he imagined what could happen. Beside him, Frost remained still, eyes fixed on the gorge now buried in white. It couldn't be a coincidence. Frost had known. He hadn't heard or seen it, he had felt it. Some kind of early warning, animal instinct, or something more profound, a connection to nature beyond explanation. Nathan bent down and hugged Frost tightly. "Thank you. If it weren't for you, I might have..." The little one simply nudged his head into Nathan's chest quietly, as if saving him was the most natural thing in the world. From that moment on, Nathan had no doubt Frost hadn't just survived death. He was living for something, a survival instinct, a mission, or maybe a first warning in a series of greater things yet to come. One February morning, the sky was apparent. Sunlight pierced through the snow-covered trees, casting shimmering beams like stained glass in the woods. Nathan was fixing the antenna on the cabin roof when Frost suddenly ran up, gave a soft bark, then turned and bolted toward the deep northern forest, a place Nathan had never dared to explore. "What is it this time, kid?" Nathan exhaled but quickly grabbed his coat flashlight and followed, ever since the night of the avalanche. He had learned one thing when Frost called: don't hesitate. The path wasn't easy. Snow up to the knees, broken branches blocking the way, and signs of wilderness untouched by man. Frost moved lightly, precisely, as if he had walked this route 100 times. On the other hand, Nathan struggled with every step to keep up. Finally, after nearly an hour, they reached a moss-covered cliff, a place that didn't seem to exist on any map or record. At the foot of the cliff was a small opening, nearly concealed by trees and fallen rocks. Frost slipped in easily while Nathan crouched and squeezed through the stone gaps to get inside. And then he froze. In front of Nathan was an ancient stone cave, unexpectedly vast, its walls stained with the marks of time. Smudges of charcoal and clay depicted animals extinct for thousands of years, giant deer, prehistoric bears, and in the center, standing out, was a symbol of a wolf's paw surrounded by strange spiral patterns, not hunting symbols, but something like a sign of reverence. Nathan found a small rock on a protruding stone in the center of the cave, its surface smooth as if polished over centuries. In its center was a paw print carved deep by an ancient hand, identical to Frost's. For some reason, a sensation rose in Nathan's mind. Not words, but a memory stream. A whispering thought: Frost was not an accident. Not lost, but returning and returning to a place that once was his. Nathan trembled, not from the cold, but from understanding. This little one, the puppy thought to have just been born, might be a descendant of an ancient lineage carrying memories beyond human comprehension. Perhaps that species had once lived among humans, guardians of the wilderness, fading into legend. And now they were returning again through the form of Frost. Frost stood still beside the stone, the light from the entrance casting a silver glow on his thick fur. He turned to look at Nathan, and in his eyes, deep, ancient, and above all aware, seemed to ask, "Do you believe now?" Nathan nodded slightly, no longer doubting this wasn't just a rescue. Not just a miraculous survivor, it was a link in the mysterious flow of history between humanity and the wild. Since returning from the ancient cave, Frost was no longer just a miraculous survivor. He carried with him a strange tranquility, as if waiting for something. Nathan sensed a subtle change, not in behavior, but in purpose. Frost wasn't just living, he was leading as time passed. Frost began to show more clearly his ability to perceive the world in a way far beyond animal instinct. He knew precisely when migrating birds would fly over the valley when snow was about to fall, and often Frost would quietly stare deep into the forest, where sunlight could no longer reach, as if something was waiting to be discovered. That night, moonlight like silver flooded the wooden floor of the cabin Nathan was writing in his journal when Frost approached and gently placed a paw on his hand. In an instant, a surge of images rushed through Nathan's mind, not clear, not in words, but vivid enough to make his skin crawl, a forest tree canopies blazing fire consuming everything in its path. Deer, foxes, and rabbits fled in panic. A sense of urgency, overwhelming and pressing, engulfed him. Nathan was startled, heart-pounding. "Is this real?" he whispered. The next morning, Nathan checked the satellite weather monitoring system. No warnings were issued, but he didn't wait for confirmation. He contacted the local ranger station and gave them a vague coordinate Frost had imprinted in his mind. At first they were skeptical, but by the afternoon a ranger outpost reported back a forest fire had broken out at that location. No system had detected it yet, but Frost had sensed it hours earlier. Thanks to the early warning, the rangers could evacuate herds of deer and contain the fire before it spread across the entire reserve. That evening, when everything had settled, Nathan returned to the cabin and sat before Frost. "You knew all along, didn't you?" he asked, expecting no answer. Frost simply rested his head on Nathan's knee. His eyes glimmering with understanding, there was no longer any doubt. Frost was not just a creature spared by nature. As time passed, the snow-covered forest where Nathan lived and worked was no longer a remote, isolated land, but had become a living network pulsing in rhythm with the silent footsteps of a unique being. Frost, the little puppy from before, had grown at an astonishing pace, not just physically, but in the way he moved through nature, as if inseparable from it. Nathan had witnessed things he never thought he would see: herds of deer that did not flee as Frost approached a mother bear, and her cubs passed the cabin without fear, casting only a calm glance at Frost and Nathan before moving on. Frost didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't signal his presence. Alone was communication. Between Frost and the wild, there was no language, only understanding. Nathan had once been a man of reason. Everything in his life began with evidence, conclusions, and scientific models. But everything had changed since Frost entered his world, from a frozen corpse to a living emblem of wild connection. He began to see the world through a different lens. He realized that between life and death, between humans and nature, an invisible but powerful thread exists, and Frost was the one holding that connection. In the areas Nathan once marked as danger zones, there were no paw prints of Frost leading wild animals back step by step, day by day. Each time Frost returned to the cabin, Nathan saw those eyes, not just the gaze of a dog, but a message: "I've completed another part of this mission." Frost didn't need a title. He didn't need medals. He only required quiet, moonlit nights, whispering forest winds, and one person who understood him, like Nathan, to know that the fragile balance between humans and nature was still being guarded. And Nathan was no longer just a biologist. He was the chosen one to witness record and listen to a connector in the form of a small pup born from ice. When the last blocks of ice melted under the spring sun, the forest began to breathe again. The snow receded, revealing soft, moist soil and young green grass. Birds returned to the pine branches, and squirrels leaped from tree to tree as if the harsh winter had never passed. And on one exceptionally crisp morning, Frost woke Nathan with a strange gesture. Not growling, not tugging his hand, just standing silently at the cabin door, eyes glowing with something different. No warning, no danger, just an invitation. Nathan followed him across streams, through towering forest canopies, up to a land he'd never marked on his maps. A meadow opened wide as if the world had bloomed in the heart of the mountains. Morning light spilled down, forming a thin mist that shimmered as if enchanted. But nothing was more magical than what awaited there. On that meadow, dozens of wild animals had gathered, from proud antlered deer to red foxes, forest rabbits, and birds of prey. All stood in a perfect circle surrounding Frost, who stood at the center. No growling, no fleeing. The scene still carried the weight of some ancient rite, something that defied human understanding. Nathan stood at the edge, not daring to step closer, his heart slowing, as if attuning to an ancient rhythm deep in the earth. Frost turned to look at him, and this time no image needed to be transmitted. Nathan understood. This was no longer about Frost or the strange things that had happened. It was a passing of something, an invitation for Nathan to step into that circle not as a biologist, but as part of nature itself, as someone chosen just as Frost had once been chosen. He stepped forward hesitantly, then stopped at the circle's edge, every gaze turned toward him, not to judge but to welcome. An owl flapped its wings, a bear stood on two legs, then gently sat back down, as if all acknowledged, "You are one of us." Frost walked over, gently placed his nose in Nathan's hand one last time, and then returned to the center. The circle widened, then dissolved into the air as if it had never existed. From that moment on, Nathan was no longer just an observer of nature. He had become a part of the hidden rhythm that sustains life. Frost, the creature revived from the ice, had fulfilled his purpose. Some beings return from the shadows of death, not to live for themselves, but to remind us that nature has always been waiting for us to listen with our hearts. Frost, the pup from the frozen world, symbolized hope, connection, and rebirth.